So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are having a space. I had promised that to a couple of guys, so I'm going to do it right now. The space is mostly going to talk about yet another rumor over a counter, a Ukrainian counter that would happen around the time of Christmas. Now, for people who, like me, are of a very specific part of the Christian faith. You know that for us, partly, Christmas is way later than most of the guys. So it's not 24th to 25th. It's this year, the 7th of January, 2025. Therefore, I will check the possibilities, logistical ones, at a later point in the space. But, well, let's start with what's going on. Couple of guys keep talking about what a Russian psyop channel called Legitimny keeps harping about, which is a potential counter against the Russian territory somewhere between, I said, Belgorod Oblast and Bryansk Oblast to come in the next few days. If it's a Christmas offensive and it respects the now new Christmas date for the Ukrainian side, which is the Catholic one, then in about 4 days we will see exactly if this holds or not. Now, if it's an old calendar, Julian calendar, Christmas, then indeed it's going to happen early in January. And there are reasons to actually speculate on it, but in my opinion, what we're going to discuss about right now, it is extremely improbable. Not impossible, quite the contrary, and I'm going to explain why. But it's extremely improbable that it is in such a short notice, unless things have been happening, but that the logistical aspect of it would indicate that the Ukrainians do not intend for this counter to be some kind of game changer, but a tactical attempt to shore up something for something. So let's cut the chase. It would be a kind of counterattack to give them breathing space in view of potential negotiations. Now, why I'm saying this? I'm going to tell you right away, there are going to be a few numbers, and they're all going to be based on Oryx. I know that a lot of you guys do not like it, but as I said, and I have said this for now 3 years, I do not check Oryx for its 100% factual accuracy, and I've already criticized it. You can check yourself the site, and based on the images we've seen the last 2-3 months, and every single month, every single week, every single day, you would point out missing losses. And I think the missing losses for this year are really close to at least 10% of things that we've seen and they haven't added yet. Most important part is, like, for instance, the Challenger 2s that were attacked in Sumy, they are not on the list. And at least one Challenger 2 was disabled and abandoned in the middle of nowhere when it got attacked. Anyway, I'm not very interested by all this. As I said, I use Oryx because of the trend that despite everything they're trying to do to keep this view that things don't get bad to worse for Ukraine, the trend simply denies that. And on base of this trend, we are going to also see why Kursk happened, and why on the basis of Kursk, any kind of offensive come Christmas, be that the Catholic one or the Orthodox one, seems extremely risky, to the point that if this Hail Mary, after the first Hail Mary in Kursk, misses its mark, it would be a catastrophe for the Ukrainian armed forces wherever along the line of contact. So we're going to start it right away. It's been now a whole week that I get ankle beaten, by people who are trying to tell me what I should be worried about, which is Ukrainian troops amassing themselves between, as I said, Belgorod Oblast and Bryansk Oblast. One of the more acute spreaders of this rumor has been Yuri Podolyaka, Yura Sumi, which is a guy from Sumy, actually. I should also check the other Sumy-based OSINT, which was more or less okay for the Kursk invasion, but then both sides absolutely shut the bed with a absolutely apocalyptic vision of what happened in Kursk, which I think also gave the impression that the Ukrainians were far beyond that. They really were, and had gained a lot more that they actually really done. But in any case, that proved to be correct. The axe is a bit less because the discussion from Yuri wasn't about Suja. The explanation was a bit further up as a follow-up to the operation from the RDK in May 2023. But anyway, let's dwell on why a counter is, in my opinion, very ill-fated from the beginning, exactly like Kursk, by the way. And this is just based in numbers. First, let's start about why Kursk happened. I already explained this, and I think the best explanation comes from a guy affiliated with the Blackbird group, which was Zelensky and friends saw the trend post Avdiivka, which was getting from bad to worse, and they decided to actually just stop the bleeding, the senseless bleeding, open another front in order to first, reshuffle the Ukrainian forces from a losing front to winning one, but pull the Russian forces from the Donetsk Oblast towards their own territory, knowing very well that within, I think, 2 to 3 months, the offensive would be stolen. Like, this is what they thought, and it's based on numbers. Now, you're gonna say, which fucking numbers are you talking about? Well, it's pretty simple. If we analyze, this is based on Oryx, guys. Once again, it's strictly about trends. You can agree or not with the numbers. I don't give a fuck. I don't care, to be honest. I'm just analyzing how one trend to another explains what happened in Kursk, and why, based on the same trend, on the same losses, another offensive within the Russian territory or where else is going to be extremely expensive for the Ukrainian side. And ultimately, if it fails, which it will, is going to cost them the war. And there are multiple dimensions here. First of them is the military aspect. Losses, fragility, gaps that are going to happen within the current defense perimeter. And most importantly, on the military aspect, it will eat up the effort of recruitment that the Ukrainians have been trying to upkeep now for roughly 7 months. So May, June, July, August, September, October, November. We know since roughly October, the numbers that they allegedly had until then dwindled, and they are roughly half of what they had per month. Now, as I said, I do not believe those numbers. I really think that they got stuck somewhere between 125,000, 150,000 people that they got within the troops. They tried to incorporate, and it's getting a lot slower now, not only because they lack the equipment and the funding for that, but it's getting slower because they are lacking actual coherent units led by people who actually can lead people. By the way, this is also affecting the Russian side. The difference with the Russian side is that they have chosen something extremely cynical when it comes to the offensive, which is, no, it's not mid waves, but which is a bait and switch tactic accompanied by some novelties on the battlefield. One of these, and I'm going to speak about it a bit later, is the Optifiber FPV drone. Those things are absolutely thrashing the Ukrainians simply because they offer complete control until the end trajectory. They offer complete control over the area you want to affect. Most importantly, you've seen what they've done. They can hit an axle, they can hit an engine, they can hit a roof simply because they are unjammable for the moment, except if you actually physically stop them. We've seen the Ukrainians try to do that a couple of times with their own FPV drones, most of the times without success. In at least one case, uh, the Optifiber FPV just took over the Ukrainian ones, most probably because um, the Russians had another one in reserve, which would then help them out to continue attacking the target. Now, why am I thinking that it's impossible or extremely ill advised to do this offensive? First of all, because you have multiple problems when it comes to the logistics. In this case, the logistics for the northern part of Ukraine towards the southwestern side of Russia, in this case, would rely heavily on the Kharkov-Pavlograd railway. You can try and skirt the border, but then it will be obvious and you risk getting hit while you're doing your transit. So if you skirt the border so from Chernigov, Konotop, and so on, you're going to get seen, you're going to get hit. Therefore, the logic would be to go through Dnipropetrovsk or Kamyanske and then set shop in Pavlograd as your major staging point, and then transfer one by one your units for this counter through the Pavlograd Kharkov railway connection. And because of Kharkov and because of what still is in Kharkov, which is roughly about 200, 205 square kilometers of area occupied around Kharkov, because in Kharkov Oblast you have another 2 to 3,000 square kilometers occupied at the junction with Lugansk Oblast. It is obvious that the Ukrainians can use that pretext to actually push back the Russians there and then penetrate within the Belgorod Oblast and try to advance through Belgorod, therefore severely impacting the northern operations, especially trying to defend Kursk, given that there has been a switch there. However, as I already explained, by trying to do this, Ukrainians will have to really dig deep in their reserves. Why I'm saying this and why I think it's extremely ill conceived to do it is because based on Oryx, you can check the losses through the years. If you base yourself uniquely on Oryx, and as I said, I do not consider Oryx to be accurate 100%, especially on the Russian side, because every time they omit losses, take ages to add stuff that we've seen for months now, pretend things never happened. So, for instance, Oryx still hasn't added as damaged 2 Abrams that were hit in Kursk Oblast. They only added the one that was hit and abandoned recently, the 11th of December 2024. But the 2 others that were hit back in November and October, they're still not there. If you add the 2 Challengers, that's already 4 tanks, 4 Western tanks furthermore, which means that the batches that were fielded, 14 for the Challengers and 31 for the Abrams, now are down to single digit for both types. Well, Oryx doesn't add them, which means that when I try to do my calculus, based on the trends, of course, not the real losses, I know something, but I cannot, having a discussion with you, you're going to say, prove me. I'm not going to start posting out every single video I'm seeing and my own calculus for that. And furthermore, we have a huge problem because I've stopped trying to do OSINT after my attempt with the cemeteries. simply because you are not sure. And I do not want to get let down by my own analysis as I was let down by other people in 2022. When I was seeing stuff, other stuff was getting reported. At the end, we had the catastrophes in Kharkov and Kherson. However, to finish up this situation, so basically, if you start comparing the situation in 2022, 23, 2022 at the end, after 10 months roughly, the Ukrainians had lost about 2,700 assets. This, of course, is a large, I'm going to tell it, a large undercount for 2022. There's a lot of stuff that we cannot see. There's a lot of stuff that was proven destroyed only recently when the Russians attacked the tank prom in Kharkov, and you could see at least 45 to 50 tanks in all kind of states of disrepair, both there to be fixed after they had battlefield losses and other damages inflicted upon them, probably either by preemptive strikes early on or simply, as I said, normal battlefield losses. But those 40 to 50 tanks that we saw on the tank prom being visibly damaged are not on Oryx, for instance, and that changes a lot. If you start doing the calculus about what the Ukraine can mobilize, what they can salvage, and so on, you have a huge issue there. But as I said, this is not the time and place to pile up on Oryx because, as I said, I only using them for trends. So let's say 2,700 in 2022 for those 10 months of fight. Then we go to 2023, and there we have almost 2,200 assets destroyed, which actually follow up a very, very weird evolution. For the first 5 months, the losses on the Ukrainian side, visibly found ones, once again, based on Oryx, do not get all fucking mad. I'm not saying it's right or not, I'm just analyzing the trend. Where roughly, actually we have a fixed number, but I'm going to say roughly 750, 760 assets. The exact number, if you follow Oryx date to date via the Wayback Machine, is 764, which is absolutely low. Is extremely low, but it played a role because the Ukrainians back then were simply deriding their successes in 2022, and for a long while the Russians started their own offensive in 2023 early on with Ugledar, had a couple of losses there, but basically they regained initiative early 2023 after the September, October, November catastrophes, and then around December the whole Lugansk area stabilized and the Russians could go on again with their options in South Donetsk and Bakhmut, which never stopped basically since September to May 2023, September 22, May 2023, Bakhmut was on. Now, at the moment when the counteroffensive started, the Ukrainians, as I said, had very low losses comparatively to the 10-month previous. And those losses were therefore also aided and buoyed by the fact that they had seized quite some equipment from the Russian side. And therefore, the stock on which they could put their feet and counterattack was excessively large. In fact, with what they were given by the Western, plus what they had captured from the Russians, the Ukrainians had a lot more equipment than they were started the war in 2022. Therefore, the logic of the counter, when people, especially the Ukrainian side, complained that they didn't have enough equipment, that's a lie, guys. But you know this already. I'm not going to have this discussion again. It's a huge lie, and it came from the fact that, unfortunately, the Ukrainians, for some reason, the Americans, for some reason, instead of going to Zapo right away, did not manage to actually be able to convert that into a counter. As I said, for the most part, is because going to Zapo at that point without proper artillery, HIMARS, supplies, and air defenses would have been even worse than what happened in June 2023. But now, numbers again. Fast forward early June 2023 to roughly the 10th of October 2023, the Ukrainian side loses 1,096 pieces. So roughly in 125 days, they lose over 30%, actually even more. They lost 50% extra to the first 5 months of the war. And then to the end of the year, so from June to 31st of December 2023, they're going to lose about 1,440 pieces of equipment, once again, based on orgs. As I said, you can like it, you cannot like it, it doesn't really matter. The point is not that, it's just to show you the trend. So basically, they start with a very low kill count, plus extra supplies from the West, plus captured equipment. Therefore, they are supposed to sustain this counter for a way longer time if they don't make the mistakes they made, which is literally they engaged a lot of heavy equipment right on. They lost it. They got absolutely smacked. And then, as I said, around the month of August, they saw that the losses were going so fast, there was no way to actually replace them from what they had received on the Western side. And the equipment that I had captured from the Russians, for the most part, they didn't have the parts to actually refurbish it in any kind of way. As a matter of fact, if you see how much T-72s they got from the Russians, visually, of course, and how much was destroyed visually, you're going to see that not even 25% of the equipment that was captured could be put back to work. And it's very normal, as I said. The state of disrepair of the Ukrainian army was also compounded by the fact that the MTO units of the Russian army had their own issues with multiple engines, gearboxes, ancillary parts that they need to fit together. A recent research piece from the Russian military itself has shown that they add up to 7 different engines for the three types of tanks that they initially tried to use. So T-64, T-72, T-80, and when the 64s that were given actually to the DNR LNR forces ran low, they just swapped the 72s, and of course the T-90s were taking center place, especially with the T-90M. So basically, the Russians had their own issues to sustain these vehicles. They get captured by the Ukrainians. Ukrainians do not even have the fucking flawless idea that what's going to happen to them. And what happens is that they simply cannot repair these tanks. They cannot use parts from Poland. They cannot use parts from Czech Republic. The only thing they can do is basically cannibalize. Therefore, the captured tanks that allegedly should have helped them, which still did, were simply forced to be cannibalized in order to get usable. But overall, it still gave an extra oomph of the on the tank forces of Ukraine side. So fast forward October 10th, 2023, the Ukrainians have lost a fair chunk of the equipment that was donated to them, a fair chunk of the equipment that they had captured from the Russians, and a fair chunk of the equipment they already had. And this goes hand to hand with amortization of the equipment, hand to hand with failures of the equipment, and due to the fact that Ukrainians absolutely mismanaged their initiative, mismanaged the stocks that they were given, they simply stopped the advance, they stopped the counteroffensive, even though since early September, the counteroffensive, and you can go back to what Budanov said, it's going to be a foot mobile war. Bro, no. It's going to be Ukrainians getting killed on foot. It's not the same thing. And exactly what happened. They tried to spare the equipment. They held back whatever equipment they could spare. And they literally let the counter die from September to early October. we were making jokes about dead Ukrainian troops in trenches getting invoked. And that's what happened. So back then, we thought that they could somehow spare some equipment in the remaining 3 months. So October, November, December. A little bit than 3 months because it was almost mid-October when the Russian counter started. And that didn't happen, actually. What happened is that in those roughly 80 days, the Ukrainians lost another 300 plus vehicles, which was following up on the tendency before the war, before the counter, sorry. But the problem was that this tendency of before the counter simply was damaging the Ukrainians more, because this time you're not advancing, you are defending, but still keeping the losses high enough actually to literally force a complete redeployment of the troops. And you know the story about that, Butuzov in November, and you know I mocked him and I explained exactly why he was wrong, why he was lying. Butuzov explained that, oh, we need fortifications. The reality, actually, it wasn't fortifications. They simply didn't have the equipment to manage it. And for a while, the FPVs saved the day around Avdiivka. The defensive positions that they had saved the day. The heights also saved the day. But when that fell and the Ukrainians were downslope, it just becomes an absolute butchery. And that's what we see with the numbers from 2023, end of year, to mid 2024, when actually we see this peak advancement on the Russian side. So most of the losses in 2023 on the Ukrainian side, double of what they had lost until the early June 2023, come the 7 next months. But in 2024, the logic was, okay, you know what, guys, these people are not going to lose that much equipment because now they're in defense and the Russians are going to get attrited. This was supposed to be the logic, right? Fine. It doesn't happen. From January 2024 to roughly 6 August, so when the operation in Kursk starts, the Ukrainians lose 1,331 vehicles, always based on Oryx. They keep losing the same type of equipment that they lost during the counter. But this time they're fully on defense. The losses are so bad in defense from the Ukrainian side that the trend is obvious. You were on defense in early 2023, losing very few vehicles, inflicting enough losses, and suddenly you go to the counter, you lose a lot more, twice more vehicles than previously. You fail on your objectives. Therefore, the Russians are on your heels, and then they counter. And during this counter, instead of going back to the losses you had early 2023, you keep losing what you were losing during the counter, more or less. It's not the same. And suddenly, seeing those losses and seeing the attrition actually affecting the Ukrainian army, as I said, you just have lost in half a year, in 7 months actually, 1,400 and something vehicles in end of 2023, and you start in roughly 8 months, actually in 7 months because it's early August, the same kind of time period from 2023 to 2024, and you lose almost the same equipment. But this time, as I said, you are not attacking. You are mostly on defense, and on top of it, the Russians attempt something that initially was seen as a distraction, and it worked like that, which is the incursion in Kharkov. That takes out, as I said, about 200 square kilometers, and stretches the Ukrainian forces even more. Now, seeing all this, you can understand that Zelensky, Sisky, and everybody around them are having no doubt about what's going on. Even at the thickest of the war, with a huge front of 3,000 kilometers, they hadn't had these losses as a daily basis, as a normal loss level. Because now the front is only 1,000 kilometers. It's thrice smaller. But you keep losing more or less what you were losing in 2022. So what's the thing? What's going to change? Well, you have to make a move. And that move is what they tried. On one hand, they tried to have all this discussion about the reduction or the cessation of the strikes towards energetical objects. So basically, don't touch my TPPs, don't touch my substations. I'm not going to hit your refineries. I'm not going to hit your oil pools. But as usual, the Russians also were keen into, helping themselves out with that. And for them, it was logical because hitting the energy grid of Ukraine during the month of March to November, it made no sense. And at that point, the Russians were advancing so hard exactly where they wanted that it didn't make any sense. But at the same time, the Ukrainians, while wagging the Russian dog, with this conversation over strike reduction, they planned Kursk. And as I said, it's extremely logical. You are losing the same thing in defense as you were losing in offense last year for various reasons. And one of them, as I said, is the FPV. But you are not stopping them. Starting from Oceretino, so basically around mid-April, you are not losing like 60, 70 square kilometers a month. You are losing 60, 70 square kilometers a week. And the more you're advancing, especially with what happened with Kharkov, the weeks, some point, become days. So as I said, the trend for Ukrainians, the writing was on the wall. We're gonna fucking lose this shit if we don't do anything. Therefore, that's why Sirski said he was forced to do it. He was forced to do it, in my opinion, because he knew that ultimately the Kursk gamble, it wasn't a 50-50. That's why I said you from the day zero of the Kursk shit show, that was the worst thing to do if you want to survive this war of attrition against the Russians. And if you check Oryx uniquely from the 6th of August until now, you're going to see that these guys lost 1,072 vehicles, assets, only on Oryx from the 6th of August to the 16th, 15th or 16th of December. The loss ratio is almost as high as it was during the 4 months of counter in Zaporozhye. The losses per day in Zaporozhye were roughly 8.9 during the active phase of counter, so basically from June 4th to October 8th. Although, as I said, the real losses happened in June, July, and very early August. After that, it was like a creeping death for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But in Kursk, the actual operational phase lasted for us 2 weeks. But even if we are, kind to the Ukrainians, it lasted a month. The 6th of August, they started their operation. The 9th of September, the Russians started the counteroffensive, which cost the Ukrainians, like right off the bat, about 100 square kilometers. Now, I've laid out all this, and I'm trying to explain you that this year, on both sides, the losses are more than double than 2023 in the quote-unquote defensive phase for the Ukrainian side. and the losses are the same they had in 2023 in the offensive phase. 8.9 during the offensive phase in 2023, 8.44 during the offensive phase in 2024. And the offensive phase is literally the whole 4 and something months. Just like the offensive phase in Zaporozhye, Bakhmut, and everywhere in 2023. The difference, though, and this is where I'm going to get you guys, the difference is that in 2023, the front line where the Ukrainians tried to make their push was roughly 400 kilometers long. In 2024, the Kursk option is 57 kilometers long in breach, and it extends 106, 107 kilometers fully with the occupational perimeter, which means that, in fact, the losses that they endured in Kursk are absolutely, abysmally catastrophic for the Ukrainians. And the logic of Kursk itself was, from the first day I told you guys, proven wrong by the losses they started taking. They are not doing better than in Zaporozhye a year ago, and they are not even doing better in the defensive option in the Pokrovsk and South Donetsk area. We're not going to speak about the push in the Kupiansk area because that's a whole other kind of worms, which the Ukrainians do not even want to start. So, by seeing this data, 2023, the counter made sense. 2024, the Kursk option didn't make sense, but it was forced upon them. They had to do something. Now, you are out of this abysmal year in terms of results, in terms of strategy. And there are other huge problems with the Ukrainian side. And one of them, I'm going to repeat it, is the fact that the rear Pokrovsk area towards Dobropila and the Dachny area, which is now being used by the Russians as an attempt to envelope the southwestern side of Pokrovsk, and therefore cut a huge transportation, although the road there is already under fire control, or at least under drone control, is actually setting the tone for the Russians to roughly within January, February, March, to make it obvious to whoever wants to meddle with this war in terms of negotiation that the Ukrainians are going to have the Russians in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast while losing the huge Pokrovsk Dobropila basin of ore, metal mills, and so on. So this argument is both for another Hail Mary on the Ukrainian side, because you are losing so badly because of yourself, because of your Kursk option, but you cannot give up. You can see that Zelensky doesn't want to give up. People are saying to him, stop it now, let's freeze the line now, and you still get away with almost everything that matters in Donbass. Pokrovsk is not taken, sister cities are not taken, they don't even get Konstantinovka. So basically, if the war is frozen right now, the negotiation process is going to be harder for Monkey in order for him to obtain the 4 oblasts to the limits. And for sure, as I said to you, the Ukrainians are not going to accept to respect the oblast limits. Because, once again, once you are beyond the Dnieper normally and it's yours, the Russians can once again threaten Zaporozhye, Nikolaev, and Dnipropetrovsk. Although Dnipropetrovsk is completely in the shit if those boundaries are respected, because it's just a stone throw from Zaporozhye, and Zaporozhye city will have at least 4 bridges to cross instead of the 2 previously, 3 if you want to add the railroad bridge in Antonivka. So, as it stands right now, the Ukrainians understand the problem, but giving up now would mean that they would be in the worst shape concession-wise. Because the first thing that the Russians gonna ask, and I'm not gonna lie to you guys, and this thing's not gonna change, is to respect the oblast boundaries. This is actually also a negative for the Russians because a small bit of Nikolaev Oblast is in the Kinburg Spit, which makes it extremely dangerous to have Ukrainian troops that can, try a surprise offensive and cut off a large part of the Kinburg Spit, and then infiltrate towards the Kherson Oblast, the other side of the Kherson Oblast. But the logic of that versus the 23% of Kherson Oblast beyond the Dnieper, plus the control of Zaporozhye city, which has those bridges, is just impossible to accept for the Ukrainians. So on that aspect, it's completely logical that the Ukrainians, what they want, if they want to go to negotiations, is going to be war until we get better options. However, given the Kursk option, militarily speaking, and uh, the cokehead has already said it, he cannot get Donbass and Crimea. Very attentively, listen to what he said. He didn't say that he is going to give up Kherson and Zaporozhye. He said, Crimea and Donbass, we cannot recover it militarily. We will try and get them through political means. He forgets the two main oblasts that actually are the whole cause of the war. For Russia, Kherson Oblast, even halved or three-fourths of it under control. And Zaporozhye, even 90%, because it's just a very small piece on the other side of the Dnieper, are absolute death sentence for Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and for the Ukrainian Navy that would have to be repatriated during the peacetime. And they got quite a lot of ships that are going to come. A few minesweepers that they got recently from the Netherlands. They got another batch of minesweepers and patrol boats from the UK and the US. There are two corvettes, Ada class, that are going to come from Turkey. So there is quite some equipment that needs that coast. And the Ukrainians know that having the Russians keep Kherson Oblast, which means that Ochakov is literally 11 kilometers from the Kinburn area, is a no-go. That would limit the Ukrainian deployment in order for them to be more or less safe in either Zalizny or Zalizny Port or Odessa, which, given how the Russians have already hit bulk carriers in Odessa, doesn't doesn't give any hope for sustaining any kind of navy anyway. But at least within the negotiation process, that could still be a possibility. Now, so far, so I've explained to you why I think that even if the Ukrainians want to do it, they have a logistical issue. That logistical issue, as I said, is that they will have to concentrate themselves through Pavlograd, which is tricky because it means that the counteroffensive can always happen towards Zaporozhye or southern Donetsk. But most probably, given the main railroad from Pavlograd towards the northeastern part of Ukraine, it's probably going to be, as I said, the Belgorod area, given that there would be a logic to regain the roughly 200 square kilometers that the Russians still control nearby Kharkov city itself. On top of it, it can always be diverted towards Sumy, Akhtirka, and then try to have another front. So literally, by having this problem with Pavlograd now, Pokrovsk was Pavlograd before. Pokrovsk allowed this distribution, but now that stuff has moved to Pavlograd, and within Pavlograd, you know what happens. As I said, the Russians are 9 kilometers from the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast boundaries. You understand where the Russians are going to go, even if they haven't finished completely Pokrovsk. The Russians are going to run a screen and pull the Ukrainian forces along with them in order for the Ukrainians to stop the Russians going further into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, because at that point, as I said, you're going to lose Mezhova, you're going to lose Pokrovsk, and you risk the possibility for the Russians to actually cut your defense areas in two by cutting you anywhere between Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk. Once again, this is in the future, this is strictly hypothetical, but the risk is obvious there. And it's obvious if you check the degree of progression that the Russians have done the last 3 months, September to November, because we're still ongoing with December. Now, the options for this intervention. Well, the options for this intervention, as I said, is that if you try this Hail Mary in Belgorod, you are going to literally hit a jackpot on the logistical aspect. First of all, because the Russians, contrary to what happened in Kursk Oblast, they do not really have natural barriers to oppose to you, as with the choke point in Korenovo, the same river, and then the slow heights from Pogrebki and up. With Belgorod, you're going to have a rather wash table. You go straight. If the Russians cannot stop you within 20, 30 kilometers, the danger is that you're going to be on the outskirts of Belgorod pretty quickly if the maneuver is well designed, and there would not be a more damaging image, in my opinion, than seeing Ukrainians start to shell apartments in Belgorod city and having the Russians again try and pull together an answer, while at the same time pushing towards Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and so forth. Politically, and the public opinion in Russia, even though they don't count that much, they will still feel the problem there. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are we still in Ukraine while these guys try to waltz every 5 weeks or so within Russia itself? But there is also the political problem here of the Ukrainians doing that, as I said, failing completely, having the same kind of situation they had in Kursk, where, as I said, within a week they failed to break through Korenovo because of some weak-ass cadets and some, half-drunkard guys from the Territorial Defense Forces. And then, unlike Suja, you are in the middle of nowhere in Belgorod. So what's going on in Suja right now is that they don't want to touch a few institutions and a few objects, and therefore they are doing this absolutely wasting thing that is those allegedly head-on, because it's not that simple. These mechanized and non-mechanized assaults, which are bringing a result, it's simply, in the eyes of many, a true waste of equipment and human resources. However, as I said, this was the logic from the beginning. This was the phase when the Kursk operation, while failing, goes back to what happened with Krinky. Krinky does just the same. They tried to do something, they advanced 50 meters, got stuck there, got bombed to shit, lost people, pulled back, then get back there, and everything happened within 50 to 100 meters. And the point, after a couple of weeks or months, was just to bait the Russians and inflict damage on them, disregarding the losses they were taking themselves. It's exactly what's going on right now. The Ukrainians, you can see they are doing plot defense in Kursk. When they lose a position, it's a complete wastage. They get, in some cases, TWK'd. In other cases, just get wiped off the map. But then the counteroffensive, and I'm going to refer myself to what Osint Yua said today, that the Ukrainians had a huge loss against the Koreans, despite the fact that Koreans had losses themselves. And this regards the options that the Ukrainian leadership picked up when it came to what they wanted to defend in Kursk. And this is why this situation is so absolutely Kafkaian, is that Ukrainians in Kursk right now are losing more people than they should, while losing far more ground than they should in Donetsk. And this is the exact same conundrum that they're going to have if they try another option, especially towards Belgorod. Because in Belgorod, what's going to happen is the same thing that happened in Kursk. They're going to advance for a while. If they get stuck somewhere, it's going to become a massacre. And once the Russians have them in front of them, there is no infiltration anymore. They are more or less located and neutralized in an area. Then they're going to go after them with everything they have. And those losses, because that's the thing, that's what Ukrainian stance every time says, that but the people that were in Kursk on the Russian side, they weren't in Pokrovsk. I'm like, yeah, but the Ukrainians that are in Kursk are not in Pokrovsk either. And as we saw in the active phase of the offensive in Kursk, the losses the Ukrainians took very quickly, despite the very problematic command situation on the Russian side, which caused them about 500 to 600 people getting captured on the first line of positions. Once again, that one is also to be checked, because it's very, very weird that those forces that should have been layered along the border suddenly ended up being in a couple of points at the border post, which made it easier for the Ukrainians to literally surround them and piecemeal defeat them. But here in Belgorod, if the Russians have learned their lesson, it's going to be a harassment strategy, especially now with the unjammable optifiber FPVs, plus other stuff, because yes, in Kursk we saw also something that finally showed its face. We had a lot of hints about the North Korean / Chinese overhead missile, and we finally saw what it looked like from the operator's point of view. And honestly, let's be completely clear, guys. I'm in awe. I'm absolutely in awe, because it's fast, it has good visibility, and you cannot jam it. And that's it. If the Russians are not stupid and they do what they did with the Shahids, and they start to equip this in mass and put that in inconspicuous vehicles like pickups, buhankas, all that stuff, it will allow them, especially given the range that we can deduct from the strikes, it will allow them to absolutely bypass the FPVs. First of all, because of the speed, and second of all, because of the absolutely dominating damage post-impact. You're not going to throw to them some mixed up explosive from breaching charges or some double tandem RPG warheads. You're going to have a proper warhead, 200 millimeter in diameter, with a projection of at least 3.5 times the penetration of your diameter. That means 700 to 800 millimeters of penetration going straight through the roof. It's going to be 2022 in reverse, when the javelins were feared to absolutely annihilate the Russian troops, but that didn't really happen. And in this case, this new tool for the Russians is not going to change much. Let's be honest with it, uh, because of the FPVs, because of the optifiber FPVs, but it will give them a quick, versatile weapon that would actually stop those charges that we saw in Kursk, when within half a day the guys were 15 kilometers away. You got these guys that get spotted, get hit by a quick succession of hits. You saw the videos, 3 positions very close together were hit, destroyed, gone. Yes, the Russians would be in the 21st century with this weapon, and it's very funny that it's North Korea giving it to them after almost 30 years of attempted development of a missile called Autonomia. But generally speaking, this is what I want to say. For the Ukrainians right now, the problem is not as much the Russians having learned their lesson. The problem is the Russians have a toolkit to stop this kind of shit. And without needing to have a over abundance of troops Of course, it will be needed. You will have to have reserves and manpower to stop these guys going forward. But right now, the dilemma on the Ukrainian side is that the only thing they gained from Kursk was the green light to fire heavy ordnance and short-range, mid-range missiles into Russia. But these things are not going to make a difference because you are not supporting a tank attack with a Storm Shadow or an ATACMS. What you're doing is trying to find these vehicles with artillery, with drones, or whatever. But as we saw, most of the drone teams are not going to go to the line of contact to find these guys 25 kilometers away. They're going to be in a great disadvantage. In a certain sense, it would be a bit repetitive of what happened with the helicopters in Zaporozhye last year, which was a carnage. So there are things for the Ukrainians to do. There is a reason for that, a forced reason, because you just failed to survive in 2024 long enough before you had this uh, small collapse. Then the attempted gamble that you did is turning into an absolute disaster, and suddenly you are faced with the perspective of actually losing a lot more, having the Russians run amok on your backyard, which would be the southeastern corner of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and there the Russians would start having options everywhere. And I already did the discussion. If these guys take Pokrovsk, I very much love the options to go towards southern Kharkov Oblast and then follow up the Mezhove rail line towards Dnipropetrovsk. So generally speaking, the issues that we are, if we were the bigger high command, is that you lose Pokrovsk, you need to pull up the plug on Kursk. But pulling up the plug on Kursk is going to be a humiliation. And nobody's going to understand it. It's just the same principle as the war they're fighting right now. If you want to, quote unquote, not lose this war within 5 to 10 years, you better stop it now and have the lines you have right now, because none of them is advantageous enough for the Russians. And you can always roll them back. But if you keep going like this, even another month and a half, it will be impossible for Trump to have enough leeway fast enough to stop the Russians from, as I said, taking Pokrovsk and being in Donetsk Oblast, in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And Trump doesn't give a fuck where the Russians are going to go. Trump is not, I'm going to tell it once again. I know that Snake has this idea of Trump looking about Ukrainian resources and Ukrainian nuclear power plants, all that stuff. But the reality is much more simple. Trump doesn't want to look at the minutia. Trump doesn't do a military analysis. Other people do it for him. But Trump doesn't need that military analysis because he doesn't want the war in a certain sense. I'm not saying that he's absolutely against this war, but he doesn't want this war to continue, because this war, despite the short-term gains for the Ukrainian, for the American policy and control over Europe, for instance, and also a reaffirmation of the world order that the Americans have set for themselves. You can see, I mean, for fuck's sake, Russians get hyper sanctioned for their war in Ukraine. Uh, Israelis just invaded Syria after invading Lebanon and after literally blowing up shit in Yemen. And there is no self-defense you can fucking claim what happened in Gaza and what is going on in Syria. The type of system that the Americans and the Europeans have set for themselves is predatory and is getting shown day after day to be exactly what they are not preaching. Is the exact opposite of what they're saying. It's hypocritical, it's biased, it's absolutely contrarian to what they preach, And it's just fueling right now. A lot of people, I'm going to say, yeah, the Israelis finally got what they wanted. They cut the caravan from Iran towards Hezbollah. But I'm saying, no, if you check it properly, they haven't solved their problem of the Palestinian population within the territory that they call Israel. The resolutions, the whole Oslo agreement process is done, but they are allowed to do it. And everybody who's not European, and I know that a lot of Europeans also are absolutely ashamed about the situation, they can see what's going on. What's going on is that one power has a set of rules for themselves and a set of rules for its adversaries or whoever they want to call that way. And they are more and more vindictive and affirming that system because right now they know there is an alternative. And I'm not speaking about the BRICS, I'm not speaking about Russia. The alternative, economically speaking, is Asia. China on top, but if you check it properly, and within, especially what happened right now with the Asian currencies due to the American monetary policies, if the Asians don't get the point that they're being milked by the US and manipulated, they will never get it. And of course, you're going to say, yeah, but they're mostly cocks because they are being controlled and entered by the US policy. But at some point, it's going to break. The same way the buck broke for the Chinese. At some point, people are going to check twice, and they're going to say, okay, you know what, my brother? It's go time. And this is why right now the Americans want to stop whatever is going in Ukraine. The Americans, in this case, being the Trump camp. Because for them, the main issue, the main enemy, let's say it as it is Asia, but China specifically, because of their power, because of their population, because of their industrial capacity, and because of the fact that China right now, due to the fact that the US cut Russia from Europe, is the only alternative the Russians have as it stands, both trade related but also politically related. And since Primakov, it has been like this, but now it's just the only option you have. And the only way to convince Russia to stop what it's doing right now is to reintegrate it within the concert of nations of Europe, but that's not possible given the level of demonization that the Russians have endured. Now, fast forward on the military side. As I said, for Trump, the point is to make the war stop, not because he loves Russia and he hates Ukraine, but because he thinks that whatever the gain is to be had in Europe through the situation is already had. The Europeans are going to buy more to America. The Europeans are going to bow to America. But the problem is that whatever happens to Russia, you don't want them to start being in symbiosis with the Chinese. Because it's a fucking land ocean that's going to be created. And one of the hugest problems the Chinese have, which is food security, can be covered by bonification of whole areas in Russia and mechanization of those areas. And it can be a land lease, it can be simply the Chinese investing in Russia with, be that Central Asian workers, Russian workers, it doesn't fucking matter. The moment this war stops and some of the sanctions are relieved and the Chinese can do their own business with Russia, the Americans are going to lose the war. And that's what Trump knows. And that's what Trump fears, and a lot of the American establishment fears right now. Therefore, for him, stopping this war has nothing to do with benevolence. It has to do with an objective of the American leadership, which is keep Russia out of a Chinese symbiosis. Because then it's fucked. It's all the more fact, as I said, that the Russians, the moment this war stops and some of the sanctions are relieved and so forth and so on, in order for them to rebuild their military, and given the fact they will not have access to machine tools from the EU or Japan or South Korea, whatever, it's going to be in China. Therefore, what is going to happen at the end of the war, in order for Russia to replenish its losses and recreate an actual valid military, not this half-baked assembly of relics that it had, let's be honest about it. I'm not afraid to call it as it is. The penny pinching within the Russian army stopped them from actually having decent ideas. Like the BTR 82 is the most obvious problem of the penny pinching affair. I'm not going to speak about the modernization of T-72s instead of having a different model of tanks. That doesn't actually matter because we saw that the generation of tanks that are aligned now in Ukraine, never matter where they come from, they are extremely vulnerable to vast aerial threats, and the cheapest one being FPVs. So fast forward the military situation. Trump doesn't want a Russia-China unison. So what he's going to do, therefore, is going to completely overlook the realities of the battlefield, and is going to keep his own ideas. And it's going to try to pressure both sides to sit on the table. But this is a problem for the Ukrainians because America will not have enough time to stop the Russians from inflicting enough pain to Ukraine on the map, but also strategically, that it would allow the Ukrainians to retain any kind of options post the war. So as I said, if things go in the worst case scenario, they try this shit show in Belgorod or whatever, it backfires and suddenly you have these guys getting pushed back within Ukraine while the Russians are pushing also deeper into Ukraine. Then your situation politically, but also militarily, is going to force you to tap out. But what happens when you tap out? You don't decide what the other side is taking, and then the Americans will be forced to intervene, not militarily. I'm strictly speaking politically, but a political intervention. We saw that with Karabakh. The first intervention attempted was in October 10th, and it took an actual complete collapse of the Armenian forces in Karabakh because Erdogan was pushing his advantage. The same is going to happen with Russia. You're going to start all these discussions, and exactly what happened in March 2022, it can take up to a month before a first draft and a tentative ceasefire might be installed. But in a month, if the Ukrainian army has fucked up its gambit and is being chased everywhere, you may lose exactly what happened to the Russians in Kharkov or in Kherson. You're going to lose 10, 15,000 kilometers in the areas that are the most strategically important to you. So, for instance, you might get chased from the Kupiansk area back to the Izium area. Who knows? Or another problem is instead of getting pushed over there, you're going to lose Siversk, they're going to fucking follow you up to the sister cities. And you lose them. And suddenly you're going to have a huge pocket between Pokrovsk and the sister cities, that what's going to happen is another Debaltsevo, you're going to have to evacuate it, and it's yet another win for the Russians. These are just minutiae on the map, but this is why I think it's very important for the Ukrainians to judge what they want from it, because Trump is not going to let them pick what they want on the military map. Given that right now Trump doesn't see a military action as a tool to convince the Russians to stop their push. And on another side, let's be honest, despite the fact that Trump will not give a fuck about personal preferences, he has not forgotten what the Ukrainians tried to do to him. Because that's another problem. And it's true that a lot of people that are supporting the Ukrainian effort that are being spoken about in the Trump cabinet exist, but these are not trying to support Ukraine per se. They are more trying to confront Russia because they smell blood in the water. However, one gambit, one jolly in this situation could have been actually Biden. Biden, if he wasn't an absolute fuck up, he could have started to quickly give an extra oomph of tanks, AFVs, APCs, whatever. What Trump is seen being shipped, what Ukrainians are looking at coming up, are vehicles that will help with logistics, will help with some operations, but you're not going to go far with M117s, with Humvees, and some MRAPs. In fact, as I said, one of the failures of the counter in 2023 was due to the fact that the units were not mechanized enough. They were motorized but not mechanized enough. Therefore, they ended up with a situation when the vehicle was survivable enough to come up to a certain point, then it gets disabled. You get out, you get killed, and the end. Same thing we had with Kursk, with this absolutely god-forsaken ambush of those two BTRs that sprayed the column of 19 MRAPs and APCs. I mean, if you want a textbook definition of what I've explained so far, with the fact that motorized infantry is as strong as its largest bore on those vehicles, so basically they're going to be as strong as a 12.7 50 cal machine gun, and that's it. Yes, of course, you can use your javelin, you can leave the dismounts and fight with infantry, but on transit, your firepower is a dude with a M2 Browning. And that's it. And you're gonna go against an asshole with a low pressure 100 and a 30 millimeter. He's gonna fucking rip you a new one anytime. And your only logic would be to be, followed by FPVs, but the other side will do the same. So when you see what was given to the Ukrainians right now, except for the Croatian tanks, some Spanish tanks that are coming. A batch was absolutely delivered because two of them were seen getting hit by Lancets in Dalne over a month ago. The Australian Abrams, for instance, need to go to get refurbished. The Croatian ones are sent, but they will not change much to what the Ukrainians have right now, because finally, at the end of the day, they are just slightly improved T-72s M1s. And the most important part is that all the units that are being planned to be incorporated in the Ukrainian army right now do not appear on the battlefield on their full formation. We had this very funny story that I still think is a bit fake of the 155th, the touted French brigade that was employed piecemeal and lost off the bat 6 guys, and everybody learned that instead of being these fearsome French trained guys, they were little more than terror-bobs getting sent to plug the holes of other units. Well, that's exactly what my scare is, that the Ukrainians are gonna do what they do usually, which is plug the gaps with multiple units of single brigades of bigger units, and at the end they're just going to add more to the confusion. This was one of the main issues in Kursk, where the assault units were handpicked from bigger units, and then they all had their own internal command, and this gave situations like Giri in the early August 2024, which was an absolute massacre. Safonovka, same thing. Therefore, the biggest problem for the Ukrainians right now is that whatever the decision they're going to take, based on their previous losses, their previous performance, chances of success are going to be slim. Chances of a catastrophic backlash are going to be huge. And as I said, if this is being tried just before the US president inauguration, so before Trump's inauguration, to somehow bring back relevancy into the Ukrainian military endeavor, I think it's going to go even worse than Kursk, with a caveat that it's going to happen in different areas. So basically, if they do that in Belgorod, it's going to be a massacre at the end of the day. If they do that in, for instance, in Bryansk, maybe they're going to have another runaway party like with the Suja area, but ultimately it's going to be a shit show because it's going to be forest combat, wood combat, just exactly that they had problems with around the Kursk area. And if it's an attempt, for instance, to push Russians back on the south Donetsk Oblast salient there, the problem is that they're going to have more or less the same situation they had in 2023, because the areas that they are countering right now is rather flat. Even the height differences, we're speaking about 100, 120 meters. It's important in some aspects, especially on defense, but because it's open fields and very sparsely populated areas, because most of the urban cluster up to Pokrovsk has been bypassed or taken over by the Russians, now you're going to have an issue where you're just going to get bombed to death. And if the Russians now integrate the new systems from Korea, from whatever, then now they have exactly the edge that they didn't have in 2022 for specific situations. I told you guys we saw a small glimpse of what that system can do when it can pile up pain on the Ukrainians with that SPG tank and shelter for troops getting hit by that stuff. It looked a lot more reminiscent to what we saw in Karabakh than anything that we have seen through this war, except, of course, for the Bayraktar strikes, because it's literally the same system. From Karabakh, I mean, not the Korean one. Now, another thing we're seeing is, you probably saw it, guys, today, another video of the Koksan, the 170 millimeter SPGs was shown, and there you have it. Up to now, a lot of guys were mocking the Russians for going to Iran for the Shahids, going to North Korea for troops, and in this case for the ATGM system. Now they're taking their long-range guns. But deep down, all these people that are laughing, they are making a huge mistake, and I think they know what the problem is right now. The Russians are extending range on their artillery. Yes, sure, the ammunition might be old, completely out of system for them, because the closest thing that the Russians had was the S-23 180 millimeter gun, which was the template for the Koksan. And that's it. That's the thing. The Russians suddenly now have a artillery that can complement their Pion or their Malka and shit on Ukrainians way beyond their FPV range and way beyond their counter battery range. That stuff's gonna fly 45, 50, 60 kilometers, and the only way to hit it is gonna be a HIMARS. Now, the problem with it is that you're going to have an HIMARS almost at every single corner of your battlefield if you don't want to get a huge 170 millimeter shell up your ass. And it doesn't matter that people are saying, oh, it fires 2 shells per 5 minutes. Bros, no, it's not that the case. That's a complete exaggeration. It's true that the older Koksan, the ones that were used by Iraq, do not have a rammer, but the newer ones have it well. And on top of it, due to the fact that you can add more servants in order to ram down the ammunition, you're going to be able to make it in 20 seconds one round. And that's 3 rounds a minute, which is slightly better than the Malva and the Pions Malka and the Pions that they're using right now. Of course, you got the problem with the weight of the shell that you're sending downrange. given that the 170 millimeters being based on 180, or thought like the 180, has a large shell but a lower explosive mass, but you don't fucking care. What those guns are going to be used for is to stay away from the counter battery range and outside of the FPV range. What this means is that the Russians are now adding quality to their troops. Whereas so far, what they were adding was quantity and sustainable inventory of equipment. Of course, you had different add-ons like optical FPVs. It's a pretty welcome innovation. FPVs in general is a welcome innovation. They had their own UCAVs, but after a series of attacks in Kursk Oblast, they also have faded a little bit. They also start to deploy more massively the Tornado S and so forth. But generally speaking, the Russians kept their innovation on a very linear manner. The biggest innovator, the biggest game content changer in this war was the UMPK. And the UMPK now has been completely changed. You don't have 501 series anymore, so the shorter range UMPK. Every single UMPK kit that is being produced is based on the 500T bomb, which has a marker of 586. That means a longer range. That means less threat for the Su-34s that are going to drop them. And that also means, and this is the most important part, that the Russians are going to still dominate the ground game due to that. But now if you add the long-range, non-line of sight ATGM, and if you start adding the Koksan, you are going to have a completely different approach if you are Ukrainian. Because up to there, you were bragging about you having a longer range gun with 155 millimeters. You were bragging about heavy FPVs, being able to reach the Mestas, the Gvodzikas, and so on and so forth. But right now, what the Russians are doing is literally, stiff arming you. And now you are a Ukrainian general, you are Sirsky. And suddenly your problem is that the motherfuckers have tools to make your life miserable. And your potential counter is going to be in the dead of the winter. And if you do not get positions quickly and your logistical train gets shot to shit, then you've lost your gambit before it starts even. That's why Kursk was, in a certain sense, forced but still smart, because it was on the dead of summer. Okay, it was the last month of summer, but as we saw, summer and early fall, August and September, are pretty good months. You had little rain, weather was good, guys could go fast enough, and then they got countered. Now you're going to have to do this in the dead of winter, which so far has been actually the problem for the Ukrainians. It's in the dead of winter in 2022 when the counteroffensive from Kharkov towards Luhansk failed. And it's in the dead of winter the defense of Avdiivka failed. And it's also in the dead of winter their defense of the Kursk pocket is failing. But they can blame the Koreans for that. So if you start piling up all these cons, you are looking at a very problematic execution. Because, okay, let's say they have a plan. Let's say that's not Belgorod, let's say that's Bryansk. And let's say that their aim is to get very close to the huge arms depot, which are roughly 55, 60 kilometers from the border. And they employ literally everything that they have to try and push there and just create havoc. First of all, you got a problem because just on the other side, you got the Belarus military. And I know what you're going to say. Oh, they're not going to move. That's the problem. The issue is that they are going to allow the Russians to fire from the Belarus. They're going to lift their planes from there, bomb the shit out of you. And right now, you cannot touch them. You may try to fly drones into them, but because of the situation, the Belarusians are going to fire back. And unlike the Russians, they have some small tools, and they also have a batshit guy that might well decide to maybe not nuke you, but do exactly what Monkey doesn't want to do, which is blow up the presidential palace in Kiev. I'm going to repeat what I'm saying here. The biggest problem for the Ukrainian military is that right now it doesn't have the assets based on what we see and what was reported on the ground. It doesn't have the assets to risk yet another push. It's just going to last a little. It's literally the junkie that for a short high is going to shit himself even worse. And in a certain sense, it's also logical because, as I said, what seems to be the case is that whatever you want from Trump, he's not willing to go on with this war. And I'm not saying he's not going to spend money on Ukraine, all this stuff. No, I'm just saying that Trump is giving the impression to the Ukrainians that he's going to fucking try and cut the losses as soon as possible. And the problem with this mentality on the Ukrainian side, on the American side, is, as I said, ultimately, the Americans are going to do what they do with every one of their vassals, which is whose interest comes first, yours or mine? And it's going to be the king's interest every time. And this is the problem that Ukrainians are going to have, is that right now the guy who they need to speak to has in mind a very, very, very specific end for this war, which isn't that bad for Ukraine, but which also have a huge problem because it cannot convince the Russians right away. In order to convince the Russians, you're going to have to use both stick and carrot. But in this case, you don't want to use too much stick because the answer for every time the Americans have raised the stick to the bear has been the bear clawing some more shit from Ukraine. And the whole point is not to kill Ukraine because it's still important. It's still a very important bulwark against Russia. It's still a very important launch pad in the future to try and disturb the Russian system, the Russian polity. Therefore, for actually, Trump has a very, very, very sane point of view. He's like, okay, guy, you're not going to win. We're not going to get into a fist fight with the Russians. So you basically have lost this war. The point is, when are you going to understand this? And I know that a lot of guys are like, yeah, but Russian economy. Guys, it will not matter. If the Ukrainian economy, that is absolutely in the gutter, is not killing off the belligerence of the Ukrainian leadership, forget about that with Russia. And the other problem is that the Russians were sustaining a 2-year war and even longer for the second war in Chechnya, with a situation where they're literally having human trafficking on the streets in broad daylight. So a lot of people who, after thinking that Russia is going to lack weapons, there's going to lack raw materials, there's going to lack manpower, now I think that Russia is going to simply fully collapse. Trust me, guys, it's not that Russia cannot collapse. It's just that collapse is not going to take a shortcut. That collapse is going to last long enough to finish Ukraine first. It may well collapse after they quote-unquote won the war. But then again, winning the war means that the negotiated sanction regime is going to be lifted, at least partially. Because if Russia goes, as I said, to the depth that I think they are going to go, you are not risking Ukraine as a state itself, but you are risking the whole point of having Ukraine. If the Russians, for some reason, and because of the fact that Ukrainians cannot sustain this war anymore, get what I think ultimately they should get if they want to be safe, quote unquote, which is the whole eastern bank of the Dnieper, then your whole idea of Ukraine, even if you have access to the Black Sea, is done. You're going to lose 11 million people as a minimum, and you're going to end up yourself with about 312 square kilometers instead of 630. And instead of having those roughly 29, 30 million within that area that you possess, you're going to be with 18 million. It's not even a realm state anymore. It's a joke. This, of course, is again a hypothetical risk in the future. But given how dumb the Ukrainian leadership has acted and expressed itself right now, it will not matter how far it looks like. Right now, they are getting ground down, and Zelensky himself says nonsense like there are 700,000 Russians in Ukraine, and our military is 5 to 8 times smaller. Bro, you're saying that you are 1 million and something, and now you are saying that you are 1/5 of 700,000. What the fuck is even that, bro? It's 140,000 people. Where did the other people go? So the logic of over expression, over verbose from the Ukrainian side, all these announcements, all this blah blah, all this bragging, and then all this begging, makes it extremely complicated for a guy like Trump to fucking deal with them. Trump literally dropped Ghani in Afghanistan exactly for that point, because Ghani, after Trump understood that staying longer in Afghanistan was just a loss of treasure and blood, Ghani started to beg the same way. And then he started to get all hissy when Trump started to point out some problems with his rule, the corruption, the lack of political freedom, which is logical. Come on, guys, to Afghanistan. Trump was just being manipulative there. But it's going to happen the same way with our friend Cocaino. There are enough troubles in Ukraine right now, and there are enough things that the Americans are saying to the Ukrainians to convince them they are fucked up. The Ukrainians that I should lower the age of conscription at 18 years old. This is clearly a political cudgel that the Americans are using against Zelensky, knowing pretty well he cannot do that. And I mean, a lot of people, especially people like Trapped Iron and Kines, have explained to you guys from Team War Criminal. You have even 10,000 casualties from that strata of people. Your Ukrainian future, you can literally suck it, because it's the smallest. Those are the smallest category of tranche of ages. Those strata of ages are literally down to 190,000 people. You kill or maim 50,000, and you're sure that within 18 years you do not have enough guys to sustain that stuff, and your age pyramid is gonna look like the vase in Ghost. So that's why I think that, generally speaking, for the Ukrainians, there might be a vision that we need to do something. We did something, didn't work, but we have to do something, otherwise it's not going to work. And it's absolutely understandable, especially if you take into account the fact that they love their PR, they love their fucking propaganda. But at the end of the day, exactly like Kursk, I mean, when you listen to Syrski said that, oh yeah, the Operation Kursk was such a strategic success. And I'm like, motherfucker, what the hell are you even saying? Look at the numbers. And on top of it, the replacement numbers do not fill up the losses for 2024, and they're probably going to not even fill up the ones in 2025. So these people know they're lying. I said again, Zelensky says, oh, only 43,000 people are dead. For motherfucker, we have found 61, 62,000 already. Plus yourself, you're saying that you're missing about 60,000 other guys. This is the problem I'm having, and it's true that the Russians are not much more credible. I mean, Gerasimov comes with a fucking million worth of Ukrainian guys that are killed or wounded. I'm like, maybe it's not that bad of a lie, to be honest, and it's a copy paste of the Ukrainian lie in a certain sense. But it's grotesque if you're not gonna say something relevant. I'm not saying the truth. I don't want to hear the truth from people like Gerasimov or like Zelensky, because they cannot say it. It's just not possible to say it. It's an information that they think they need to hide. But you cannot go out and say something that you know yourself being false and being provable as false. When Gerasimov comes out there and lies, he's saying something that you cannot prove by essence. It could well be 1 million. We don't know that. But the reality of it is that at least, 200,000 guys are recoverable. And we got the evidence for that. We got sources for that. You cannot come and say, oh, only 43,000 and 370,000 are like, bro, if you lie for a certain ratio for your killed, if you apply the same ratio for your wounded, we end up with 600,000. So finally, if you add also the deserters that are over 100,000, you are roughly at 700,000. So generally speaking, Gerasimov, okay, is lying through his teeth, but it's not that far from the truth based on data that we can verify. But it's still a lie, of course. Now, the problem is that we cannot prove it. Nobody can say, oh, the only thing you can say, oh, you have to prove it 100,000. I'm saying, like, yeah, I can also always try to find out the situation with that. Let's say that you add the guys who fled Ukraine, because as you know, the Germans themselves said they had a fuck ton of people in age to fight within Germany. The polls said that have over 400,000 Ukrainian workers in Poland. At those, well, your real losses are over 1 million. You can always spin this shit around and end up with a situation when you know that people cannot contest you. But with Zelensky coming saying something that shorts actually the reality, that's when you have a problem. And that's where I think the Ukrainians have this problem right now, where they're forced to lie. Even if they want to say a bit of truth, they cannot say it, because they've coasted through this logic that strategically Russia has already lost. But in reality, Russia, strategically, the moment the war went through the attrition phase, had won. And we've discussed about this. For Ukraine to win on strictly mathematical base, they need to kill 3 to 4 times more Russians. And this is just not possible with the capacities that Ukrainians have right now. And I explained, you have a Fiat 500 and you have a BMW M5. And it's true that the 500, especially the Abarth 596 or something, it's going to go fast. It's a fun car, but it still stays a 500. The other shit is a bigger car. Maybe it's not the most sporty or whatever, but it's going to go fast and further and have more people inside and more shit. It's unfortunate for the Ukrainians, but it's the way it is, and that's it. There's nothing more to say to that, except if, of course, there is an outsider input, which is happening every single day, and which is making this war worse for both sides. But saying both sides in this ratio of Ukrainian and Russians is actually worse for the Ukrainians. They are the smaller party. Having similar losses affects Ukraine far worse than Russia. And I said it, Russia, even if Russia had 200,000 killed, but Ukraine has 120,000, the impact when you see the age groups that are being found, those impact far less the Russian age pyramid that the losses on the Ukrainian side impact the Ukrainian age pyramid. This war is turning, due to the attrition conundrum, is turning to an actual democide of the Ukrainian people. But it's not even the Russians willing to do it. It's happening naturally because the Ukrainians are trying to do something they just cannot do. They are hurting themselves. And once again, we can discuss about who caused the war, who started the war. I don't give a fuck. I'm just trying to explain you the trend of the war and the mechanism of this war and how absolutely disgusting the whole idea that Ukrainians should go into an attrition war against Russia is. Remember, guys, early 2024, motherfuckers, Kaufman, Gadi, Robley were praising the strategy of attrition. Well, when you check even Oryx, you find out that the strategy of attrition doesn't work actually for the Ukrainian side. It makes everything worse for them, especially when they start to have the initiative. And that's it, guys. That's the whole point. Is there going to be a counteroffensive in Christmas, be that Catholic or Orthodox? I do not think so. It might well happen, and I wouldn't discount on that, but I don't think so if there is an ounce of intelligence on the Ukrainian corps. If the Ukrainian officer corps doesn't want to explain to 100,000 Ukrainians why their sons are missing, wounded, or killed, within next year, I really think they're not going to do it. But it's very possible they do it given the constraints that they have. The areas, I still think that the most prevalent area due to the logistical facilities should be Belgorod if they try it. Because on top of it, it really puts the fear into the Russians, given how important Belgorod is as a transitional axis, west, east, east, west. And of course, it's a high risk, high reward situation because, as I said, politically, especially having Ukrainian tanks firing to Belgorod proper, despite whatever I'm going to say to you about being shameless in war, it's still going to be a very potent image and a very bad optic for the Russians. Even though the Russians are, I don't know, gobbling half of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast territory, the whole PR game of the Ukrainian side, aided by the Western press, is going to magnify that against whatever happens in the rest of Ukraine. We had that with Kursk, guys. I mean, you remember, everybody was lionizing the Kursk adventure. Now we are over 4 months after, and nobody dares to actually criticize it yet, the same way we had with the counter last year. But soon enough, especially if things go to shit in January and February, you're going to have the same kind of articles that were scathing against the Ukrainian leadership last year. You guys remember the Washington Post, a series of articles onto that. So yeah, I mean that's basically it. For various reasons, I hope they don't do it. Actually, it's not true. I hope they do it because, as I said, prior to the Kursk and the first day of the Kursk debacle, that's going to cost them they're gonna they're gonna curse the day they did that thing, and it's gonna be the same thing here. And I really hope they do it within the Russian territory, and they don't try it in Donbass or Zaporozhye. I really want them to go through the whole fire loop in Russia, because I think that unfortunately for a lot of people, it has still a bit divided the Russian society. It has hardened the Russian society against Ukraine, and this is one of the things that Zelensky and co absolutely have failed to understand. They are doing these actions for a Western audience, most of them. Also for the internal audience, although, you see them in Kursk, and then you see them grabbing some guy from a taxi in Odessa, or grabbing some dude in Kharkov with his baby in the stroller. I mean, it's pretty easy to counter that internally, but externally, of course, it's extremely complicated. I mean, you have to see all the fucking shields that still maintain that Kursk was such a good idea. Well, at the same time, as I said, once you start doing the numbers, even with the most pro-Ukrainian source, you are like, I don't really think we're in Kansas anymore, Toto. So, I mean, you get the reference here. The problem for the Western PR, Western directed PR from the Ukrainian side, is that it's slowly, not only missing its mark, but it's becoming irrelevant. It doesn't matter how much some retard in Germany thinks you're winning, when every single day guys like Abu Juliani are reporting 15, 20, 30 square kilometers lost in southern Donetsk. So, generally speaking, as I said, I hope that they do it, honestly. But in reality, I hope they don't do it. Because then it would force the hand of the Americans to either get them out of this shit, politically, of course, and of course with the military aid. But the most important part, so far from the Russians, we have never had really any kind of backing down. A lot of people are being absolutely outrageous with Monkey, but Monkey has willfully multiple times tried not to actually hurt the Ukrainians. And you can call him cock, you can call him weak, whatever. But the problem is that he's doing that because he wants to still fucking live side by side with those people, which is a problem in the current optic. But every time the Ukrainians have done everything to just shit on his quote unquote weakness, which has resulted in him becoming actually far more ruthless and cruel, to the point that now it's not the Russians hurting Ukrainians the most, it's the guys from the TCC. These guys are literally using Gestapo methods. I mean, if you put a lot of scenes in black and white, you can pass them for the Schindler's List. Oy vey, I did that one. So that's it. That's not a problem right now. So yeah, as I said, there's pros and cons, but actually, even the pros are forced upon the Ukrainians. I hope it's not going to happen, but if it happens, it would be another blessing in disguise. Although it would make impossible proper negotiations, because Kursk just threw everything out of the window, and a Belgorod incursion, a big one, not the shit show of last year with the RDK, is just going to make it impossible for Trump to negotiate anything. And the problem is that if Trump reads the room and is like, why did you do that? And shows actual understanding of the Ukrainian situation, then it's very simple. First thing he's going to do is going to short their funds and short their weapons. And especially if it goes bad and Trump stalls their delivery, then it's going to become a rout, and that rout is going probably to become the end game of the Ukrainian military in parts of the Kharkov Oblast, in Kursk Oblast, in Belgorod Oblast, and of course in Donbass. And once that happens, well, as I said, Trump is going to precipitate a negotiation process where the Ukrainians would have tapped out. And you know what happens when you tap out? You don't get to ask shit. And this is the danger of self-delusion. And retard from NBC that went to lecture Monkey today or yesterday, I think, over how Putin would be a weaker actor in front of Trump. I'm joking right now, to be honest. The Ukrainians aren't, because they get bombed and killed. But I'm like, bitch, why are you yapping? I'm going to show you what weakness is, and that's what's going to happen. And I know you guys are, oh, general was killed in Moscow. Oh, that's so bad. Cool, guys. Just in case you want to know, the strikes in Zaporozhye were not on a hospital. They were on a military base of the 21st National Guard Brigade. And there were ambulances in the area. So cool. You killed one general and his aide, and you most of them probably lost once again. Double-digit guys. And you're gonna say, oh, but you know, a general and some guys that they just rounded up on the street. Yeah, it's true, but then you're gonna have to round up another 20 guys from the street, or 40 guys, or 60 guys. It's like Desna this year, that we still don't know how many people got killed over there. Those are losses that don't come back, especially if you have a smaller pool of people. So, by all means, I am calling for the Ukrainians to do some stupid counter once again and end up with Kursk on steroids. And as I said, force Trump's hand into not pushing them to the table, but literally starving them to come to the table. So yeah, guys, that was it. It was a bit longish, but yeah. To recap everything, I don't think it's gonna happen. If it happens, then it should be around the area between Belgorod and Kursk. If it's in Bryansk, it's mind blowingly stupid, but you know Ukrainians have done worse. And it's going to be the Hail Mary. After the Hail Mary, forced by, as I explained, a lot of circumstances. But the most important part is that if this one fails, the consequences for the Ukrainian military all over the line of contact are going to be absolutely horrible. And if this counter happens, while the Russians are slowly re-equipping themselves with some specific specialized equipment, like, as I said, these NLAWs, these long-range guns from North Korea and so on, then the reality will be that after a few days or even a couple of weeks, we are going to end up with the same situation that we had in Kursk. And if nobody stops Zelensky from doing it, Zelensky might very well, up to a point, I'm not saying it's going to be a short cut, is going to get Assaded. He will have to fucking flee. Because, as I said, if you are going to put each 6 months 1,400 vehicles, where you're barely getting anything from the West right now, and most of the shit that you get or you produce yourself are SUV trucks with mild steel armor slapped on them, you are going to get in trouble long term. And I'm not saying that Russia is in such a better position. I'm just saying that if you do some things, you're going to end up with other things. That's it, guys. That was the space. If you have questions, yeah, why not? But I rather not waddle too much or double too much into explanations. But it's up to you guys. If you want to intervene, it's up to you. Okay, nobody. Thank you very much. Then see you next time. Hopefully, I will not regret this space. But well, we'll see. Have a good evening. For those that are in a different time zone, have a nice day. And if we don't have any space before Christmas, Merry Christmas for everyone who has them in 4 or 5 days. And for the rest, then we're gonna have another discussion. Bye, guys.